Namaskar. This is Umacharan Pati, Deputy Registrar of Gangadhar University. I welcome all of you to this fifth lecture of this series. And we have with us our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor N. Nagaraju sir. We are fortunate to have got Madam Dr. Nivedita Mohanty for this great lecture on a very good topic. And we are thankful to the School of History led by Dr. Umakant Mishra and all the faculties for organizing this series so beautifully with eminent scholars from different states, including Orissa. I welcome on behalf of the JM University family, all our faculty members. I welcome and thank our registrar, Srimati Jugleshwari Das, our Chairman PG Council, Professor Mohin Muhammad, all the deans, all heads, all faculty members. I welcome the invited guests, all the academicians, and everyone who have joined this program in the online mode. I also take this opportunity to welcome all our students and research scholars who have joined this lecture from their home or from different parts. Thank you very much for joining with us, and a special note of appreciation for Madam Dr. Nivedita Mohanty ma'am for giving her consent and honoring the invitation of our Honorable Vice Chancellor and sparing her valuable time for the benefit of our students, research scholars, teachers, and everyone. Thank you very much. I welcome all of you to this webinar once again. Thank you. Now,
before you go further, Dr. Umakant Mishra, we can all see Mr. Lalit Man Singh also. So I think we must also welcome him.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So on behalf of the GMU family, welcome Lalit Man Singh, sir. And he was with us 6 months back when we inaugurated the bust of the great, our former principal, Madhar Man Singh, sir. So I welcome, sir, on behalf of the JMU family. Thank you very much for joining with us, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor N. Nagaraju, sir, for the welcome address.
Thank you, Dr. Pati. First of all, I join you in welcoming all the dignitaries, particularly Madam Nivedita Mohanty. In fact, Dr. Umakant Mishra, I insisted that Dr. Umakant Mishra talk to Madam Mohanty for a talk, and Madam Mohanty was very kind enough to have agreed. And this is an absolutely relevant topic for the university, why the university, the entire academic community of the state. I very sincerely welcome you, Madam, to the GM community. And this is the fifth in the series of lectures we have been doing, right from the first lecture was started by Professor Sahu of Delhi University. And it has been a very rich series and throwing light on certain relevant areas. I think this is going to be even more relevant today's lecture. One particularly appreciable factor is that Lalit Man Singh ji has joined. Sir, we very fondly, in fact, the GMU and some, very fondly remember the late Principal Madhar Man Singh, whose name we have, very proudly used for the university library. I welcome other dignitaries, and without wasting much time, let's look for the talk to be delivered by Madam Nivedita. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So I take this opportunity to welcome the members of the Syndicate and Academic Council of Gangadhar University who have joined this program. Thank you, everyone. Now I request the convener and head of the School of History, Dr. Umakant Mishra, to introduce the topic and also talk about our invited guest, the chief speaker.
Thank you so much. Am I audible? Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Am I? Yes.
Yeah.
Good morning and good evening to people who have all the way joined from United States of America. Very warm welcome to this webinar series and this fifth lecture. Esteemed Vice Chancellor, esteemed Speaker Dr. Nivedita Mohanty, esteemed Ambassador Lalit Man Singh ji, esteemed Professor Umakant Mohanty, and many distinguished participants today in this last leg of the webinar series on configuring vernacular regions and belongingness, historical perspectives. We had so far 4 lectures, first by Bhairav Prasad Sahu, who spoke on the historical process of formations of subregions of Dakshina Kosala, Vishnu Mahapatra, who questioned the categories of region and identity, Chandi Prasananda, who talked about modern historical writing and erasure of many of the subaltern past and many of the sources which have not been taken into account in the constructions of Odissan history, and Manu Devadevan, who spoke on Lakshmi Purana from a Sastrian structuralist perspective and narratological structure of Lakshmi Purana. The video recording of all these lectures would shortly be uploaded in the YouTube link of the university. Today we have Dr. Nivedita Mohanty, who will speak on Odia nationalism, region, identity, and cultural boundaries. Whereas earlier scholars largely looked at the pre-colonial aspects of region formations, Dr. Mohanty will be talking on nationalism, and when we talk of nationalism, we talk about the distinct political connotation of it and nationalism as a distinct political phenomenon. But these articulations of Odia nationalism in Odisha is not based on ethnicity, unlike European experience. It is not based on narrow ethnic limits of language or religion, as had been the case in many, historical nations and regions. Had that been the case in Orissa, a Bengali-speaking Gauri Shankar won't have been its primary articulator. Articulations of Odia nationalism is based on convergence and intersections of many typologies, as Bernard Cohn in his book, Anthropologist Among Historians, wrote that. Bernard Cohn's typologies of region talk of historical, linguistic, cultural, and socio-structural regions. And Odisha as a region in modern period and Odia nationalism in modern period emerged in the intersections as well as convergence of all these 4 typologies of nations, 4 typologies of regions, that is historical, linguistics, cultural, and social. These regions, these typologies of regions are enmeshed and intertwined with each other to create region in modern time. The belongingness of region is derived from both diacritical as well as syncretic values. Diacritical distinctions defines the unity of a segment in terms of differentiations from other regions, from other segments, whereas syncretic values define the unity of that segment in terms of internal solidarity. Dr. Nivedita Mohanty obviously emphasized on these diacritical distinctions and the syncretic values that led to the development of belongingness and identity in modern period. Dr. Nivedita Mohanty's Odia nationalism quest for a united provinces 1866 to 1956, which was published way back in 1989, is one of the pioneering works on nature and contour of Odia nationalism in 19th and 20th. She is the great-granddaughter of Fakir Mon Senapati. Her father, Bipin Chaudhary, who are the son of youngest daughter of Fakir Mon Senapati, is one of the distinguished painter of pre and post-independent time. Dr. Nivedita Mohanty's joint authored book, The Eloquent Silence, The Life and Times of Artist Bipin Chaudhary, written by, with maybe his brother Subhanjan Mohanty, is a moving biographical account of this great artist who was deaf and dumb, but whose voices are eloquent in the strokes of color and brush, and is a great source for visual historians who are working on region identities and other aspects of art. Her other works, including a book on Revention, apart from her books on Odia nationalism, Eloquent Silence, her works on Revensa College is one of the one of the unique books which has thrown light on institutional history of Ravansa College, whose history is coterminous or identified with history of modern Orissa. See, the editor of Imaging Orissa, a book on a visual taste, as well as a rare blend of visual taste with intellectual curiosity and intellect, which is Imaging Orissa. And we have a very good review by Rajmohan Gandhi in Hindu on the book. For her pioneering works on the history of the region of Orissa, she has been awarded honorary DLIT degree from Fakir Moni University in 2015 and Ravansa University in 2019. Finally, to end my brief introductions, which has become a little big and elaborate, she started her teaching career in 1969 from GM College. Therefore, I welcome you to your working place, ma'am. I am extremely beholden to all of you who have joined today and to esteemed speaker today. And I must also tell in the same breath that she is also the daughter-in-law of Gyanapita author Gopinath Mal. Therefore, she carries many lineage as well as many blood, and I hope that today's lecture would be a great treat to our mind as well as ear. Thank you so much, ma'am. And now I welcome and invite you to speak your lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Misra. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor N. Nagaraju, Dr. Umakant Misra, the department, the School of History of GM College, the faculty, staff, and students of the GM University, and esteemed participants, especially I mention our friend Sri Mansingh. First of all, I must express my gratitude to the GM University for inviting me to take part in this webinar. GM University, a college then, has a very soft corner in my heart because, as Dr. Misra mentioned, I have started my teaching career here. And the love and affection of the students and of the people in Sambalpur had made me feel as though I belonged to Sambalpur. So thank you for helping me renew my emotional contact with the GM College, now the GM University. In this series, we have been listening to the presentations by erudite scholars. These are quite a learning experience for all of us. I am also thankful to you for choosing a fascinating and a sought after area in the recent time. In my discussion, I will be dealing with the identity, the region, the identity and cultural boundaries in the context of Orissa, more specifically in the context of Oriya nationalism. Now, the self-definition of a region could be summarized in terms of boundaries based on the commonality of its people. A strong regional identity based on geography, history, culture, language, religion, economy, education, discipline, helps in building a friendly, healthier relationship with neighboring regions and adds to the strength of the nation. However, before getting into the main topic, I would like to go to the background and discuss about the entry or the coming of the British to the mainland of Orissa. In 1803, when the British came to occupy Orissa, it was not a complete Orissa. By then, in the north, in south, They had already taken over some territories and had placed them with the other provinces. And after occupying Orissa in 1803, they also took over Sambalpur in 1818, Sambalpur and its 18 forts, and included them in the central provinces. So after occupying Orissa, they didn't unite the whole Orissa into a single unit. Instead, the heartland of Orissa was called the Kotak division and was included with the Bengal presidency. So when they took over Orissa, by then they had already occupied the south, north, and later west. So the south and north, mostly dominated by the Adivasis, rose in revolt against them because they had employed the middlemen to collect revenues for the British, as well as to share their administrative responsibilities. So in Medinapur, there was a decade-long uprising by the Bhumis tribe called Chuad Bidroh. There were uprisings, resistance in Parathamundi by Sabaras, which continued for 70 long years into the Sipahi Vidroh time. There were Khans who were culturally connected to wider areas. They also revolted. Starting from Gumsar, they spread themselves to Koraput, to Ganjam, to Bodh, to Anugur, and also, when necessary, to some of the kingdoms in the coastal areas. So the late 18th century resistance against the British had already started in the so-called Odia territories, but outside the political boundary of Orissa then. Now, when the British occupied in 1803, 1804, the resistance started by Joy Rajguru, the finest and the most significant freedom fighter of Orissa in the turn of the century. Now, in order to defending his kingdom and his king, he sacrificed his life, didn't compromise. So there is a folklore still prevalent, Joya poche jibana dela nuai nahi matha. So that was the beginning in the main coastal Orissa, which started a rebellion against the British, and that was so rooted that the consciousness of a rebellion against any exploitation was still going on. And then started Paika Bidroh in 1817, where the Paikas joined, the Khans came, and they all revolted against the British. The greatest point, the fineness of the whole thing of the Paika Bidroh was when the Paikas, the Gandhas, entered into Puri, seized the town, held the banner of Jagannath, saying that he is the ruler of Orissa and he is the one who is leading the war against the colonial rule. And the priests joined, these Paikas, these Khans, the priests, the people, they all declared their freedom against the British rule and decided that they will occupy Khurda, Gajapati rule would be established. It's a different story that the king was imprisoned, died in the prison. It was a different story that after a long guerrilla war, Bakshi Jagabandhu also surrendered. But then the fire was not extinguished. Then what happened? In the southern Khurda, in the peripheries, some kind of rebellion was going on. The most important was in Tapang Dolabhera. The important point here is that when the revenue collectors, the British officials went to his house, his wife Haramani came out with kitchen appliance to attack the revenue collectors. So how much it has rooted into the grassroots level, women, the complete Paika army, the neighboring states, they had all joined into this and declared their freedom which was, of course, not going to be. The entire Khurda with its peripheral estates were occupied by the British, taken over by the British. But the most significant of that is in 1836, 100 years before the Orissa province was born, there was the gathering of the Paikas of Dalabhairas of Kans near the Bhagavati of Banpur. They selected one of the local men, Ponchu Naik, and declared their freedom, called him the king of Saran Singh, rode him the whole town, and declared their independence, freedom from the British. It was, of course, they said that they had their freedom for 3 days, but the commissioner, Henry Ricketts, said, no, it was just for a day, and he was arrested. But it is interesting to know that 100 years before Orissa state was formed, they had declared their independence against the British Raj. 111 years before the country attended its independence, they registered against the foreign rule and had declared their independence. So the whole thing was anti-British. The freedom struggle, the nationalist movement started in Orissa as anti-British, anti-colonial, anti-socio-economic abuses. And therefore, the small kingdoms as small regions joined with the larger kingdoms and the larger regions. So the concept of regions was coming to take a different form in the minds of the people. And what happens then? These small states who had joined in the Paika Vidroha, like Konika, like Kujang, they were all occupied by the British as the British territory. And during the Sepoy Mutiny, when the coastal Orissa regions had joined the Sipahi Vidroha, along with the important role played by Sambalpur, they were all taken over by British as their Khas Mahal or their own territory. Now, this is what happened to the region. And then this early period, this was anti-British, and this was a different kind of nationalism started in Orissa. During this time, however, the following years, it was not only the conflict and upsurges, there were some developments which added to the growth of different kind of atmosphere in the region called Orissa. The introduction of education, vernacular as well as English, through educational institutions, through publications, contributed to the growth of the intellect. Now we know that the education system and the vernacular education all started by the missionaries, whose main goal was for the spreading of Christianity by conversion, which they perceived would be easier, would be possible only through the local vernacular language. So the vernacular education was introduced and was spread. Now the introduction of the vernacular language, introduction of the vernacular in the schools and different educational institutions there in the primary level, not only contributed to the growth of the literature, that also contributed to two main factors. It gave a sense of unity, cultural unity to the people, and also an awareness that they have a common language, which is going to be a major deciding factor in remapping the boundaries of Orissa in future. Now, when this was happening in the 50s and 60s of the 19th century, we all know there was an Anka Durbhikya, the devastating famine, which kind of affected Orissa in the economic and social life. It was not seen such kind of devastation in the recent memory of the people. It was also during the time when the study was made, when the investigation was made, the British official, the Secretary of State Stafford Northcote, said that maybe it would be necessary that the Orissa would be made separate from the Bengal presidency so that the administration would be more efficient, because the famine perhaps happened because of the inept administration. Now, it gave a kind of emotional feeling that perhaps India, Orissa would be a separate unit. However, that would take a long time. But during that time, what happened? What happened? The inside story. The British administration in Orissa, headed by Ravan, decided to have the educational institutions, decided to spread the vernacular education, decided to have press. That was the time the present Ravan University was born as the Kotak school. And then the progressive thinkers thought that they would have a kind of press which would communicate with the people. Perhaps with that, the famine would have been reduced in its intensity. Whatever it is, the Kotak Printing Company was established in 1865. In 1866, our Utkala Deepika, the weekly, came out under the editorship of Gauri Shankar Rai. That was going to be the flagship of Oriya movement in future years, and continued to be so for the next 68 years of its life. Following immediately, the newspapers, the weeklies, the journals, starting with Balasore and Sambalpur, and in different Gurjat areas in Kotak, they multiplied and they became the harbingers of Odia nationalism. Now, when this was happening, there was a kind of consciousness among the Odias to bring some kind of social and development, the kind of internal progress, and that created anxiety to the Bengali settlers who are wielding power and influence in the society. So they thought that this is a dangerous situation. They are going to lose this land forever. And they planned for a conquest of culture by the reconstruction of the history of Orissa, by declaring the language is not independent. This had the aim that if Orissa is declared as not having an independent language, its history was different, influenced by Bengal, it would be integrated with Bengal, and Orissa would be forever the permanent part of Bengal. Now, that was ably thwarted by the Odia leaders, which is known as the language agitation. Now, when this was over, language agitation, what happened? The Odias thought that this kind of intermediary rule was not only happening in the central, the main Orissa, it was happening in different territories which are lying outside and having the dominance of Bengal, dominance of Telugu language under Madras presidency, dominance of Hindi. So that's kind of unification would be necessary, but they had to finalize the concept of region. And then they decided that an urge for creating an identity for themselves, regional identity for themselves. And for that, they thought that our inheritance, our heritage had to be brought in, to be disseminated, along with our education, our press, our vernacular literature, our social reforms. This heritage should be presented to feel proud of our what Orissa was. And during this time, the corpus of writers, Radhanath, Fakir Mohan, and Madhusudan Rao produced the Barnabodha, the first Odia book. And these writers wrote textbooks, wrote history, wrote literature, wrote landscape, wrote about religion, on everything comprising on what Orissa is. The most important thing, instead of making it regional, limited in outlook, they tried to also write on the Indian history, translated it, and to connect the Odia region with the greater concept of India. That was the time when Pothis were also translated. That was the time when the discussion, the essays were written on India as well as on Orissa. So this is the time when emphasis was given on the Odia language and literature. A triad was formed. The concept of language, literature, and the region. These three formed a triad, and that would be the concept of region, the edifice of Oriya movement. Now this, significantly, this model of harmony was followed by the regions in India in future years to follow. Now, when they were, after saying this, what is the region they are going to refer to? What would be the outline? They went back to the history, they went to the 13th century, to the Ganga rule of Ananga Bhimadev III. Ananga Bhimadev had acquired Sambalpur, included Sambalpur and Sonpur into the kingdom. He had also extended the empire up to the Valley Godavari district. He also had contained the Muslims in the north, and after having the kingdom, he wanted to stabilize it, strengthen it by declaring Lord Jagannath, the Lord of the universe, as the ruler of the kingdom, and he the Sevaka. That was a moral strength given to the people to fight for the survival of the kingdom. And then followed the Suryavanshi rule. They rode like colossus, taking to greater heights in the literature, in the art, in the culture. And Odisha, during that time, had become a real cultural region. And that's why in later years, when defined our concept of region, we always said from Ganga to Godavari. Now it was the time when the 19th century, because of the Ravansha College, because of the rising the growth in the literature and language, because of social reforms, we cannot ignore the fact that that is the time when Samanta Chandrasekhar, our Pathani Santa, produced the Oriya Almanac, replacing the Bengal one, which had become the household item. It was also the time the upset started from below, the reform movement led by the Mahima Dharma. And it spread to the Gurjats, it spread to the marginalized class. It even went beyond the boundaries of Orissa. So that was the Odisha thing. So it was a strong middle class which was emerging. When we talk of the strong middle class which was emerging to take the leadership of Oriya movement, we go back to the 16th century. Our middle class concept, the intellectuals who constituted the middle class in the 16th century, we think of Balaram Das as one of the Panchasakha visionaries, who also founded the Trinity with his predecessor Sarala Das, with his younger contemporary Jagannath Das. Lakshmi Purana was the book which had been discussed in our last lecture. So these Trinity, they translated the Indian epics and Puranas. They also, while translating, gave the Odisha's pictures, Odisha's stories, and in the deviation from the originals, they showed the exclusiveness and the uniqueness of Odisha. That was the time the cultural identity of Odisha was stabilized. So when this was done, it was thought, with the concept of region finalized, with the construction of identity in the process. So it was a time leadership was coming to the picture. It was a time when, apart from all these writers, starting from Gangadhar, Meher, Nandakishore Bal, Vishwanath Kaur, and women leaders like Rebala, etc., it was the time the history of half a century of Odisha going to be led by Madhusudan Das, who came from Calcutta. He understood, he laid the trajectory that our main problem was our middle class rulers. And so it would be necessary that we fight against them, and for this we need the support of the British. And to concretize this, when he was thinking of plannings, and the British actually helped in the circular to declare the amalgamation of Sambalpur with the main Orissa. So that was a great success in the Odia unification movement, gave confidence, faith, and hope. And Madhusudan understood the problems that bogged Orissa. So in his approach, in his policy, instead of venting his anger against the real enemies of the Orissa identity and unification, he decided that there would be two things necessary before anything happens. So the regeneration of Orissa was necessary, and for that, the spread of education, the development of cottage industry, and for that, the second point, to follow a policy of non-violence. And with this, he started his concept and presented, and that is when the Utkala Sammelani was formed in 1903. Before that, he had been to Europe and was exposed to the Western philosophy, the Western approach to the nationalism, came in contact with the German and unification movement, which had just been successful. And he was influenced by Bismarck, by Cavour, by Mazzini, and by Abraham Lincoln from US. So the Utkala Union Conference, by Utkala Sammelani, which was formed by him, his policy, its activities, everything should be based on, it will be controlled and guided, it will be controlled by the general will of the people. That is how he declared it as the National Assembly. And the constructive program was formulated where Odisha identity would be presented to the society, the development of Odisha to face any opposing kind of forces, the self-confidence to be brought to Orissa, and in the Utkala Union Conference, he introduced the Gulapi Pagodi, pink turban, much before the Gandhi topi had come to be used. He also encouraged the national song to be sung in every session of the Utkala Sammelani. He also encouraged the hand-spun dhoti to be worn much before the Khadi culture had come in the national level. So that is what Madhusudan Das thought. He aimed that during his lifetime, the Orissa would be strong, Orissa would be standing on its own feet, but he was looking 100 years ahead of his time. And then he decided that the youth force should be encouraged, much like Swami Vivekananda. He encouraged the youth to take charge of the situation. He encouraged the physical fitness. He opened the libraries for them, joined the provided the international journals so that they would be able to know what is happening in the world. So this group actually became the leaders in politics, in academics, in literature, in everything that Orissa was going to attain soon. In the second decade, when the war came, Gandhi's emergence, the Congress dominating the scene, the two streams that believed in the pro-British appeal to have the ambition, nationalism fulfilled, was also following Congress, which was anti-British. Now these two streams which are divided, they were divided in the principle, how to approach, how to achieve the Odia nationalist goal, but at the same time, they were complementary to each other in attending for the prosperity, for the regeneration, for the success of Odia culture. And it was the time one can never forget about Utkalamani Gopabandhu Das. The the heart and soul of Orissa, Utkalamani Gopabandhu, who founded the Satyavadi. In the Madhubabu's concept of youth, he started the school from the beginning. The students should be educated in the cultural, the Indian tradition with the Western scientific education also, so that they would be complete individuals to take up the charge of their land. So Utkalamani Gopabandhu and Panchasakha became the life and vision of Orissa in the next following years. And when I talk of this, that was the time I talk of 1920 to 1940. That was the time with all this background, all this development, all this regeneration program, all this youth development with the Satyavadi. That was the time there was cultural explosion in Orissa. Those 20 years are the best periods in the 20th century, in the sense they were the creative period that formulated many of the aspects of Orissan society. Talking of the literature, Sabuja Kavi came with the literary marvel. The socialists came with the revolutionary ideas and connecting with the world socialism. So it was not Orissa, the Odia socialist ideas were connected with the socialist ideas, a global situation. It was a time when the enlightening ideas were coming and flooding Orissa region. And it was a time when in polity, in economy, in performing art, in literature, everywhere the growth was spectacular and could be seen. In the 30s, it was also the time when the modern Konarka was built. The 7 volumes of Punna Chandra Bhasakosa by Gopal Chandra Praharaj was like 7 galloping horses of the sun chariot, which took the Odia language and Odia literature to a newer heights. It was also the time when Vaishnava Pani's Padmamari travels to Ranchi to perform for a day. But Kartik Ghosh's performance was so spectacular that instead of one day, we continued the show for 1 month. It was a time when the physically challenged in Orissa, they could get the support and understanding of the society by the foundation of the school for the deaf. So it was a time when literature, our language, our performing art, our vision, everything attaining a newer heights, and it was considered to be a period when cultural exploration happened. And also it was during this time that Orissa state was formed in 1936. When it was formed, there was no doubt that it was highly disappointing because apart from Sambalpur and part of Ganjam, everything was not amalgamated, unified. But at the same time, it was cause for celebration. So Kuntala Kumari Sabat, who had tried to get rid of all kinds of superstition, she she wrote an article that every Odia should have a prefix with her name, Birasri. Getting rid of all kinds of superstition. She and her women writers together, they produced progressive literature. It was also the time when the Odia formation of the Orissa state affected the neighboring states. It was the Jharkhand movement which had taken shape in 1938. It was when it started. In 1939, when Japal Singh Munda comes and takes the leadership, it takes a newer form. And they wanted also, like Orissa, to be unified, to have a separation from Bihar, constituting the South Bihar. It was a different thing that the language was not their identity marked because they were multilingual state. However, now in Orissa, the Greater Orissa was formed in 1948. during the during the merger of the princely states. The merger of the princely states, when the region, our region was going to be established, and they tried to get the Gurjat merged into Orissa. Gurjat was always under the feudal rule, and it was always termed as the dark terrain. But the Gurjats also, the rulers of the Gurjat, starting from Ramchandra Bhanjadev, Sri Ramchandra Bhanjadev, to Bamunda Sudhaladev. Sudhaladev was chosen as the first president of Utkal Union Conference. His sad demise, however, it never allowed to happen. Sri Ramchandra Bhanjadev was the first president of Utkal Union Conference. They had patronized Oriya education. They had encouraged art, culture, literature of Orissa. They had a lot of contributions to the development and progress of Orissa. So to know about this Gurjat states, 26 of them, but 24 came and merged. Sadekala Kharswa came and was transferred back to Bihar. That's a big story. That's a different story. We'll come to that later. And these states have their own Bangsabalis, life, histories, the family trees. Now the family trees refer them, it was kind of social mobility, even though many of them were the local people, became the rulers. They connect themselves to Surya Bangsa, Chandra Bangsa, and to Rajasthan and to Kshatriya families. However, the Bangsabalis are relevant sources of history. Not only they speak of the king and his ancestry, they also speak of the subjects, mostly the Adivasi subjects who are the majority in the respective states. The culture, the tradition of these Adivasis, their language, and the Hinduized state when they synthesize themselves, all this were taken into, if taken into consideration, would be a great source of history. We must say that Lakshmi Purana Balaram Das was when with the Brahmins, when they fled to the peripheries, so the Gurjats, when the Muslims rule happened in Orissa, Lakshmi Purana also traveled to Gurjats. Even among the Adivasis, Lakshmi is worshipped with much sincerity, with much devotion. Social traditions also travel. Lakshmi, with his concept and approach, became a very important part of the Adivasi life. Now, with this Gurjat merger, also we come to the next stage of Orissa unification movement. In the 50s, in the 1953, when states reorganization was formed with the idea of the central government that the linguistic states should be formed on the basis of linguistic language, the states should be formed, Orissa being the first linguistic state in the pre-independent period. They were much encouraged that perhaps the Oriya-speaking territories left outside would be included. That never happened. But what happened during this time? There was a spurt of nationalist literature. There was spurt of different kind of literature in the territories beyond Orissa. So there was a time when Gopinath Mohanty gets the first Sahitya Academy Award. It was the time when Madhar Mansingh, Oriya Sahitya Itihas is having an impact. That was the time when the Khuruda Itihasa is brought to picture our own nationalist approach. It has to be remembered that our Oriya nationalism goes through stages. First it was anti-British, then it was pro-British, and now it is during the Gurjat, it was the Congress, it was pro-Congress who led the Praja Mandal movement. So it has a different stages where the goal was the same, the freedom, the unification, and taking our identity to a higher level with the development and progress of Orissa. But it is a different thing that during this SRC, we didn't get our desired areas. But also let us take the example of Jharkhand. What happened in Jharkhand? Jharkhand was claiming, but Jharkhand was dismissed as saying that it was never part of, it had no majority language. It is multilingual state. So on the language basis, since it is cannot be formed, it was not made a state. So that was the time a very significant remark was made by their leader Jaipal Singh Munda in the parliament. I would read that out. Take my own language, Mundari. My language has 14-volume dictionary. The points this, and it is a fact that there are more people who speak Mundari language than Kashmiri or even Oriya or some of the other languages. Supposing that had been one of the recognized languages, how are you going to solve the problem of the reorganization of states on a linguistic basis for the Mundari speaking people, Mundari speaking people? You will have to disrupt several states all over the place. Therefore, I oppose the question of reorganization on a purely linguistic basis. So identity is not purely linguistic basis, they say. It is based on, as we accept also, apart from language, history, geography, culture, everything is taken together, depending on what is necessary when that comes into force. Take the example of Assam. Assam. In 1870s, it was made a chief commissioner. It was made a separate province. But until 1960, even during SRC also, Assam was not the official language of Assam. What a sad situation. It was in 1960 only Assamese was made the official language. It was introduced as the medium of instruction. Up till now, it was only in the primary level. Of course, with the due protection to the minority language. So language played a significant role for the formation of Orissa. But during the boundary commission, it was not taken into consideration anymore. The boundary was finalized, and even though from time to time, the boundaries, the demand for the expansion of the boundary, extension of boundaries happened, it was never took place. It was the final stage. Now, when that is what is happening, is it the end of our identity, quest for identity? The question is that in spite of the political boundaries, we have the cultural boundaries far broader in outlook and ever expanding. So it is called cultural boundaries, for we know that if geography makes history, history also creates geography. Before going to the cultural boundaries, let us also discuss about Orissa and Oriya identity, which has also captured the attention in the recent times. Many say inside Orissa, there are sections who say that if when you talk of Oriya identity, it is the Oriya hegemony, where there are important, significant languages, especially of the Adivasis. When we talk of Orissa identity outside Orissa, particularly in the dismembered Oriya tracts, it is said that Orissa identity doesn't make us inclusive. We are not part of Orissa politically. The question is that Oriya was the official language. So what happens? Orissa was the official language, and Oriya was, even during that time, the tribal, the Didai, the Bonda, they also had said that we are the Oriyas. The language was the official one. So with a liberal approach, we can also say that Orissa and Oriya identity could be one and the same. Now coming to the cultural boundaries, we will look at it in the perspective of the 21st century, how do we relate ourselves, our identity to the regional, national, and global context? Let's come to the global context. What about the Odia diasporas all over the world? They are there in the US, in the UK, in Europe. Jagannath has traveled with all the diasporas from earlier times till today. So our Lord of the universe is there already. And even the Ratha Jatra is celebrated with much pomp, celebrity, with rites and rituals as observed in Puri. Gajapati is invited there as the head of the Jagannath traditions. Even recently, the Rath Yatra going on everywhere. Even recently, the latest addition is the Rath Yatra in California, where the priest was from Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh. Rath Yatra, Lord Jagannath has become the Lord of the universe. It's not confined to the Oriya devotees alone. And these non-resident Oriyas all over, they connect themselves with Orissa. They not only try to develop they not only try to teach Odia language to their own children who are interested, they also, the performing art, the textile, the food is also very much important in the regions where they live. They connect themselves to the development program of Orissa, the spread of education. So if we don't culturally connect them to us, if that is not cultural boundary, what else is? And then come to the national level. In the national level, we immediately go to the territories, Oriya territories, dismembered territories. We have territories in Andhra, in Western Orissa, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh. Even though they have assimilated the local culture, they have still traces of Oriya culture. If the desire is there, then we can always interact. And let us go to the north, to Singhbhum, where I spent more than 20 years of my life. So I get involved in this. Now, Singhbhum, where the Odia language and Odia literature flourish because these people are interested. They fought to make Odia language as one of the second languages in the state. And also, we can connect ourselves with pride of the Atharva Veda, Paipalada Sangita variant, the in Odia script, which is prevalent. The tradition of Atharva Veda, Paipalada Sangita is also strongly prevalent in a village in Guyapada in Singhbhum. So it's part of our heritage. We can all connect ourselves with that kind of culture. What about the Sasana villages in Guyapada? In Singhbhum? These are also very Odia literature. Even now, they take pride. There are many Sahitya Academy award winners there. Odia literature is flourishing, is very successful, as in Orissa. The Jainism, the Buddhism flourished there as part of our own heritage and connection. The iron mining, the copper mining, led by these Jain traders, exporting them to the Rajasthan and Gujarat, is all this to there. Take the case of Sadekala Khorswa, which remained apart from Orissa. You go to Sadekala Khorswa, it is Orissa alive. The language is there, the food is there, the culture is there. Even everyone speaks Odia, the Odia schools are there, but it still needs a lot of attention from the mainland. Even the royal family, the king marries in the royalty in different parts of India. Whoever it is, whatever language from where she comes, she speaks Odia. She has to follow every detail of the Odisha's festival. Think of the Chaitra Parva, Sarikala's Chho. The origin, the place of the origin of Chho. Don't you think it has the theme, Orissa theme. It has the lyrics from Orissa. The dance has many aspects of Orissan history. Don't you think we should call it as one of the national festivals of us, of Orissa. So, and let's talk of, it is outside Orissa. Let me give an example of Mauritius. In Mauritius, during the night, I think I'm exceeding my time. Can I take a few minutes more?
Yes, sir.
So think of Mauritius. During the 19th century, when the indentured laborers went to, and also migrant laborers went to different places outside Orissa, Mauritius was one place where a family from Jajpur had gone. So we met the grandson, a great grandson of him, Ramrup Jagannath. He often comes, he came quite a few times to Orissa, did the tarpan of his assistant, of his ancestors in Jaipur, came to National Archives, Delhi for a talk, and he says that he has inherited Pothi from his ancestors. Talks a lot about Odia culture, how much he was an HR officer in the police department in Mauritius. He aspires to have a Jagannath temple and had a discussion with us in the video. Let us take, this is another case I will give. I think I have written in some magazines about it. Once I was traveling by train. One young man was traveling with me, and he asked me if I am from Puri. I said, no, I am from Bhubaneswar. So he said he was going to Puri. I thought he was a young man going to Puri from some profession. He said, no, I'm going to find out my roots. I said, roots? He said, yes, I'm from Karnataka. I speak the language. I don't know Oriya. I have nothing, no connection with Orissa. But in my family, I found right in the beginning a food item called dalema. So I always ate that in my house, never found it any other place, not in friend's house, excepting one or two of my extended families. So when he grew up, he asked his parents, his grandparents. They said, long back, the Brahmins from Puri had been sifted to by the king, and there they stayed back. They are not Odia anymore, they don't speak the language, but the food item has remained as a thread of a connection of their identity. So where the identity goes, if you have the desire, and he comes and to Puri to find out his roots. Let's come to our own region. In our region, we have to go. What about the concept of our identity? We have to go beyond the timeline. We have to cross the timeline and to know what had been the missing links for today's younger generation to know about our past. It's not that we should always bring back relics of the past, but something which makes us understand our region, which makes us understand our identity, to understand our own self, rediscovering ourselves. It is the missing links we have to discover. Let's take the example of maritime trade. Our maritime trade, we glorify the maritime trade. But what about the songs and music? We didn't have any when we just sailed in the boat. What about the technical terms used? We have a Kaivarta Tantra, which also writes in detail about the port taxes, port traditions. What about translating that and bringing it to public notice? What about the different deities, the worship of Mangala? For example, we had the trade connection with Sri Lanka, and the Buddhist Tara is worshipped as Mangala in Konarka. That speaks of two important things. First, we have Buddhist Tara changed into Mangala. Number two, that we had trade connection, and there was a port in Konarka. We also have we also try to understand what the women did, what were the riverside rituals during this maritime trade. We have in Satovaya, we had the Saptabarahi temple where the 7 female deities were there. One went to Biraja, one went to Ari and then transferred. And the 5 of them, when during the cyclone, they were shifted to Gupti in Kanika. These Panchabarahis are worshipped by unique female deity, female priests. Families are fixed. If one from the family is sick or not available, the other one from the other family comes and takes charge. No male member is allowed. And they say they have from the Sabara families. What about that tradition? And also, significantly, what about the food connection? That's very fascinating thing for me. When I find that for example, in Ethiopia, restaurant in US and also in Switzerland, in Europe, I found they have not only some of the food items of Orissa, chakuri pitha, and also other food items. The way they serve, it reminds us of Orissa. Who learned from whom? How the tradition came to us or went to them? Was it the direct or indirect contact of trade and commerce? Number two, I was talking the last time that I had the experience of having malpua that I make at home in Hania in Crete. Who taught whom? How has the contact happened that their food came to us or our food went to them? These migratory patterns has to be observed, and these are the missing links we have to find out. That would open up, lighten up many of our dark alleys and will enrich our history. What about the metallic empire that we had from Ganjam, from Hazaribagh to Ganjam? The iron work, the copper work, and what about the rich history that we had connected with this rich tradition of ironwork? The British were very surprised to see the sword that the pikers used, but where were they made? Were they found all imported? They were definitely made here. So these are some of the important things we have to find out. What about the Buddhists? We all know that the Buddhist Sarakas produce this silk, textiles. What about our trade connection? They were the excellent traders. Did they have any connection with the Silk Route? How did they export the silk? Or it was only for the home consumption? These are the missing links. What about the indigo cultivation, the Champaran Vidroh that introduced Satyagraha into our national policy, the first experiment of Satyagraha? What contribution did Orissa have in all this? So these are some of the missing links that we need to encourage to study by the people. And now while talking about this, we have to also realize that this is the time of pandemic, a period of crisis, a period of emergency. During this time, there is a fading horizon which you cannot allow to fade forever. What about the health? What about the education which is suffering for the Adivasis, of the marginalized, of the downtrodden? We have a special role to play. What about the Adivasis, with whom we have always followed earlier policy of expediency and exclusion? What about their language, which are rising up? Their scripts are being made. Their literature, their oral literature is part of our heritage and part of our history. What about them? What about the culture which developed from inward, from within? So these are the things. What about the other section of our society? I'm talking of the artisans who created not only the agriculture tools, the sword to fight, defend ourselves, they also made temple items, they also made our day-to-day life stylish and practical with the utensils, with the kitchen items and everything. Instead of trying to see them fading, it's time that we encourage. Our fight now is for the recognition of our Rasagola. The fighting is going on. Food is an important item that helps us constructing also our history and identity. So also these classes, who are the strongholds, who are the basis of our culture and civilization. If we understand them. It is not that the relics of the past is thrust on the youth. The today's youth have to look back to their past, understand their inheritance, select and choose so that they can have the understanding of the self, of their identity, and they will have the self-discovery. So will there be no racism, no ill feeling. They will have better understanding of the globe, better understanding of the other nations, of other identity, of other people. They will be better citizens of the multi-layered society, and also will have a deep roots in themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your lecture. I'm deeply beholden to you. And there are a lot of questions. I need to summarize them. My system is not working. I'm using another system. Let me summarize the questions into three categories. You could take down these questions, ma'am, so that you can reply them together. And then any other participant who wants to chip in and speak by going live, they can also do so. There are few empirical questions and there are few conceptual questions. Let me take up the empirical questions such as role of Vaikuntanath Dey in the unification of Odia speaking people. Then another question on role of Venkatesh Dev, Raja of Katinga of Kandhamala district. Role of Venkatesh Dev, Raja of Katinga of Kandhamala district in the amalgamations. Then our Vice Chancellor has also asked questions on Palakhemundi revolt, and can you throw some lights on Palakhemundi uprising? Then there are a few conceptual questions. Let me initiate them. You said that cultural and historical region. Your plea was that the cultural boundary is expansive. It's not fixed. But at the same time, you also said that the basic contour of cultural and historical regions were stabilized in 16th century. Then how do you look at the emergence and spread of Jagannath culture and temples in Gadajat states in 18th and 19th century, including Odia literature? This is a question from me. Then there are questions about sub-regional unity. How do you look at the specificities that sub-regions have, different sub-regions of Odisha have, and how are they linked with the broader region, cultural, historical region? And one of the best statement that are appreciated by many is 7 volumes of Purnachandra Vasakos are like 7 galloping horses. So also the fact that history defines geography, geography also defines. And now about the cultural expansion of Jagannath cult and others. But when we are talking of if cultural and historical region was broadly formed in 16th century, is it incorrect to say that the unification movement of Odisha in 19th and 20th century should not be said as a unification of Odia speaking, because it is if 1920th century, hello. Please mute yourself. Please mute yourself. Somebody is creating disturbance. Just hello. I request you to mute yourself. Mute yourself for a while and then you can come live and ask questions. Let me finish up these questions that have been asked and put in the chat box. If the broad contour of historical and cultural region was already formed in 16th century, is it incorrect to say that the unification drive in 19th and 20th century as Odia speaking, as a movement towards unification of Odia speaking, because language was not the sole criteria of this political unification that we talk of 19th century, because there are other axioms of identity, and these are actually broader axioms rather than strictly linguistic one, which is about ethnicity. Therefore, language or religion as exclusive criteria of building an ethnic identity was not the actually basis of creating or demanding for a separate unified Odisha, which never also happened in as in the case of Kharesh, Sadigala and Khatso. These are the broad questions that have come. And then another question is about Mahima Dharma. How has Mahima Dharma broadened the identity of Odia nationalism in late 19th and early 20th century? These are the questions, and then I request the Vice Chancellor, if he has to intervene, then he can. Otherwise, you can answer that. Sir, do you have any questions? And further expand the discussion now.
Questions? I think I profusely thank Madam for such an elaborate overview of things. The only thing I just was asking is, with the Savara revolt in Koilakemudi region, not too frequently we come across history books, nor in the local, though that which has happened so early part of colonial regime. Could Madam throw some light on that? That's the only thing I ask.
And you can take these questions and then. Yes.
So can I take the questions now?
Namaskar, madam.
You take. Yes, sir, you go ahead with your question, Sasmita.
My question is, how do you situate both Jai Rajpur and Bakshi Jagbond in the larger scenario of nationalism? Because Jai Rajpur, he was fighting for his patron state, that is the Khorda state, and he was displaying his loyalty. And Bakshi Jagbond, before starting the Pike Revolt of 1817, he wrote a letter to the British where he clearly said that I am an obedient, loyal subject, and he recognized the British suzerainty, and he appealed to the moral right of the British to restore to his Jamindari, which obviously didn't happen. And it is because of his loss of Jamindari he started this Pike Revolt. And then going forward, the sporadic revolts that you talked about in different parts of Orissa in 1940s, 50s, 60s, if you see, I don't know whether we can, uniformly tell them as anti-British or not, because sometimes they were also fighting against their own jamindars or landlords, that we all know how it has culminated in the 1938 Kotak movement. And if you take the example of Pabna revolt from Bengal, they clearly, the peasants, they said we recognized British as our ruler, and they were fighting clearly against their own immediate jamindars. So in this scenario, how do you analyze their behavior, their activities as national? Thank you.
Thank you. You can take.
So let me respond to the Vice Chancellor regarding the Sabara uprisings in Parlakemundi, which started, towards the end of 18th century. It is mentioned in many of the books, not maybe the broader history books, that the Sabara was resisted And when the resistance of the tribals started, they were the subjects of the Jamindar or the king. So when the middlemen came to, because when in these areas, the understanding of the Raja and the Praja, the subjects and the king, was quite cordial. And they never had to suffer to that extent, exploited socially and economically so much as when the middlemen started coming in employed by the British, because the middlemen didn't have any commitment to the local people. So that was the time when the Sabalas started resisting. And since that system, the middleman system or the intermediary rulers continued, so this resistance continued, and this Sabala resistance continued even through the Sipahi Vidraha. And during the Sipahi Vidraha, as you know, the complete control of some of the Jamindaris at British territory, not allowing any local Rajas to have control, that actually suppressed these Sabalas. You know, the Sabalas or Khans or the tribals were the savages, according to the colonial rulers. So, but it was there, very much there, and it has been mentioned in many books, in anthropological history, social history books. And coming to the role of Vaikuntanath De, Raja of Katinga, in Vaikuntanath De, Raja of Vaikuntanath De had the first application for the unification of Orissa went from Raja Vaikuntanath De in 1876 from Baleswar. So that was the first unification application to the British. So Vaikuntanath De had a very significant role to play. And Vichitananda Patnaik also took together again. About the Kandhamala and Anugur, we know that the Kandhas had spread themselves extensively to different areas and especially to Anugur and Kandhamar. So that is why these local rulers, they joined with Khans and this Kandha resistance continued for long years to come, and they had continued with them, and it was not actually the Odia nationalism in that sense of the term. It was, the territory was Odia, but it was part of national resistance against the foreign rule, that is the British rule. And answering to your question, that how can we say the cultural expansion, cultural boundary today, expansive and extending, if we go and stick to Anangabhima Devs of 13th century? No, that is not the point. The point is that when they were building up their nationalistic ideas and trying to construct the identity, that was the time they had to refer to history and heritage and history. And what is the concept of region they are going to present to the people to unify them, so they could take the history and refer to Anangabhima's Deva's time and Ganga to Godavari. It is not that in the 19th and 20th century, particularly 20th century, that they were referring to that, but that was actually the concept which, and when the Surya Vamsi ruler ruled over this area, they definitely appreciated that. And during the Surya Vamsi rule, of course, the expansion, much more expansion took place. And that is how our Singhbhum and kings were part of the state. But when they started, they thought that they would look at a concept of a region and present it to the people so that the triad, language, literature, and region has a definite shape to build up the edifice of nationalism. And sub-regional question you are asking, the sub-regionalism during that time was not the concept. It was all the Gurjats were independent. They were independent, and only British occupied the coastal Orissa. And these sub-regions or the Gurjats, they joined the coastal Orissa, they had the formal connection with the Orissa Gajapatis, but they never had any they kind of modal connections. It was not, they were free. So it was not question of sub-region then. It started when after this, the unification of Orissa happened. That definitely the Odia identity, Orissa identity I was referring to had the implications, and the Adivasis, because of their language, because of their culture, and because they were feeling isolated and left out, they rose into demanding the recognition of their rights, the land rights, their rights to their own place, their forest rights. So these are not sub-regional. These are the basic socio-economic problems. And coming to the Western Orissa, I still remember Gangadhar Meher. Uchcho heba pai jebe koru asa, uchcho karo tebe nijo matrubhasha. He was the one who led the banner of Oriya unification movement. Sambalpur became our pride and the positive outlook, the step for the unification of Orissa. But then the self-discovery, the self-improvement, the development of a region leads to thinking of its own identity. So that happens, it's the inevitable result of our history, which we have seen. And there is another question, Mahima Dharma. Now, Mahima Dharma, as I said, when the society was getting education, some kind of development, inner analysis, introspection was taking place. Mahima Dharma was a kind of resistance against the caste system, against the social order, against the Brahminic supremacy, against the exploitation by the kings. So it was from the lower level that the absurd, it was an absurd from below that it happened. And the Mahima Gosai, after his death, this Bhimo Bhoi, who wrote his lyrics, the famous Bhimo Bhoi, the approach was for the common people, for the peasants, for the Adivasis. So it spread all over, and this was not sub-regional, but it added to the growth of Orissan society and culture, I would believe. And about Joy Rajguru and Bakshi Jagabandhu is a very significant question. I fully agree with you that Joy Rajguru, I still say that he was the most significant, important freedom fighter in the turn of the century. Now it was, as we all know, to get rid of Maratha exploitation, they had also accepted the British to come. But when the British came, the colonial rule started, the exploitation went to that extent, and the British failing their promises to the king and to Khurda, Joy Rajguru, the scholar minister rose in revolt that we have accepted you to relieve us of the problem, but if you make us suffer more, we are not going to tolerate you. That is how the resistance started. That was Joy Rajguru. That is why once, even though he had accepted, there was no going back in his attempt, in his effort to retrieve the position and declare his independence of him and save his kingdom and the king. Now, Bakshi Jagabandhu, you are absolutely right. As I mentioned often, that when Joy Rajguru rose in revolt, Bakshi did not support him. There was personal conflict. But Bakshi Jagabandhu thought that perhaps with his letter to the British, he would get back his zamindari. Once he would have got the zamindari, perhaps we don't know what steps he would have taken. But because he has lost his zamindari, He suffered because of the intermediary rulers losing his power, losing his position, losing his property, and the same kind of suffering went on, affecting other people. And the British economic policy, which was largely responsible for creating economic havocs, there the Bakshi Jagabandhu led the revolt. And that the 1817 Paika Bidrah, whatever the background, had happened earlier. Nonetheless, it was a resistance against the British. It was the first kind of freedom movement that happened finally, and the declaration that they have attained the freedom with the king as the Khurda establishing of the Gajapati kingdom was not untrue. So whatever the beginning, it was definitely a nationalist movement in that sense, because here the people joined, here the tribes joined, here the grassroots levels it was fought. We don't know how many of the aspects are still in dark. We don't know much about how it spread. Like Sipai Bidrah, it was the Sarapatra, Sakwa we say, the messages were transferred from one place to another. What happened during the Paika Bidrah? How was it distributed? How they produced the source their weapons? Where was actually it was made? All these things we do not know. What about the art and culture, role of women of Paika Bidrah? We don't know. These are the whole thing, grassroots levels history, that will make our concepts clear, whether it went to the level of national movement. But definitely the steps that he taken declaring the freedom from the British was a nationalist movement. Any other questions?
There is a question from S.K. Naik sir. I could not find the questions. Can Dr. Naik come live and ask the questions? And there is a question also on Bajirao and other. You don't have the time to look at Rajamandal movement, Bajirao and others. Can Dr. Naik come, and also Professor Rajara from Central University, Koraput also joined. If he has any questions, please go ahead. Dr. Naik, can you come live and ask questions to ma'am? Because I glossed over that question, sir. If not, we'll pass on the questions to ma'am's email so that she can respond directly to you. May I, with this, end the discussion session? Excellent talk and many food for thought. For me, configuring region and its attribute is quite difficult. More I approach it, more I try to objectivize its attributes, more it becomes liminal. So for me, this becomes a liminal concept, and you have, you forced us to think on the expansiveness of it. But nevertheless, we are there and we are not there, kind of feeling that I have. Thank you so much to you, ma'am. It has been a great 1 month almost, and I'm especially beholden to you. You have been our guide, mentor, and I expect and hope that you will continue to shower your blessings on us. Thank you, esteemed Vice Chancellor, Deputy Registrar, sir, all of Register and all other faculties and students who participated in large numbers. There are cross sections of people who participated, asked questions, and has made this webinar series a great success. I, on behalf of GM University, on behalf of esteemed Vice Chancellor, and from the School of History and its faculty, students, and GM University, I'm extremely grateful to all of you, especially to ma'am, because she has been one of the drivers to make us work, make us stretch our limit. Thank you so much. I now request Honorable Vice Chancellor to speak few words and formally announce the closure of this webinar series. Thank you so much. And
thanks, Dr. Mishra. Madam, it was really a very, very interesting talk. It was well informed of this after your talk, and some of the incidents that you brought to light, probably they are there to be further investigated by our faculty and students. The amount of I was telling my friend, the amount of work that was done on these kind of aspects of history in Bengal and the university, probably we need to emulate that in Orissa, particularly by the university faculty and students. Thanks again, and hopefully the department will be in touch with you for future references and suggestions. Thank you all. Thank you very much. And Lalit Mansingh, thank you a lot for joining, and all the academics, the students, and faculty. A good initiative, Dr. Mishra. Very, very important. Keep doing that. Don't stop it here. And thanks once again. Thank you all. Thank you.
thank you to all. Namaskar. My special thank you.
Thank you.
Namaskar.